Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that just when you think the nightmare is over, a single fateful decision could send shockwaves through every life it touches. In this chilling new expansion, Dani's dark spiral collides catastrophically with Anita's fragile world, and Jacob must bear the unbearable burden of justice versus loyalty. Dani had always been the life of every part. Her laughter, bright and melodic, chased away the shadows that clung to the corners of any room. Friends joked that if the world ever grew dark, all it would take was Dani's smile to set it ablaze again. But beneath that exuberant exterior lay a restlessness she barely understood herself. Late nights spent chasing euphoria with too many drinks, reckless laughter masking an anxiety she refused to acknowledge. It began innocently, a glass of wine to unwind after work, a round of shots at a weekend gathering. Gradually, the glasses multiplied until mornings blurred into nights, and nights bled into a haze of memory fragments. On the night everything shattered, Dani had pushed past the point of no return. She'd been at Marco's, a dive bar that throbbed with neon and battered stools, the kind of place where regrets came cheap and the beer cheaper. She arrived around 10, voice high and squealing as the band tore into a rowdy rendition of a rock classic. Marco, ever the attentive bartender, slid a gin and tonic across the counter the moment Dani slid into her usual booth. "Rough day?" he asked, wiping a glass with a rag that had seen better decades. "You looked like you needed it." Dani laughed, the sound brittle. Work had been a disaster, fumbled presentations, a manager's thinly veiled disappointment, and a heartbreak she'd bottled up until that afternoon. She told herself she was celebrating nothing more than survival. One drink turned into two, and two blurred into five. She texted Anita, her best friend for years, promising to meet her at that late-night party out by the river. When Anita didn't respond, Dani ordered another round and sank deeper into the whiskey's embrace. By midnight, she was stumbling out of Marco's, the street lamps gleaming in pools of yellow against the slick asphalt. Rain spattered her hair like tiny ice pellets. She fumbled for her car keys. She knew she shouldn't drive, but the thought of calling a cab felt like admitting defeat. She climbed behind the wheel of her aging sedan, unsteady hands fumbling with the ignition. The engine rumbled to life, and for a moment, her head lolled against the seat as the alcohol's warmth flooded her veins. The highway ahead was deserted, a ribbon of tar disappearing into the night. She eased onto the road, heart hammering with the misguided confidence that nothing terrible could happen. Meanwhile, Anita was at another gathering, a modest house party hosted by a friend of a friend. She and Jacob had arrived together, her arm looped through his quiet presence always a soothing counterpoint to her vivacious energy. They danced to lo-fi tracks, exchanged quiet smiles. Anita felt no longer haunted by old fears. She believed she was indestructible tonight. When her phone buzzed, she glanced down to see Dani's name and a message that made her brow furrow. "On my way. Watch for me." Anita assumed Dani was just running late. She didn't know about the drinks, the bar, the darkness waiting on the highway. At precisely 1:17 a.m., the rain intensified. Dani's windshield wipers beat against the glass like erratic metronomes as she barreled down the road at nearly twice the speed limit. Her thoughts were hazy memories of Anita's laughter, a scolding look from her manager, the feeling of emptiness gnawing at her chest. She rounded a curve too quickly, tires hydroplaning. She swore a curse as the car spun, headlights slicing across the trees like frantic searchlights. Reality shifted in that instant. Her world condensed to the scream of metal, the shatter of glass, and the thunderous impact that hurled her thoughts into oblivion. Anita, 5 miles from home, was texting Jacob about her plans for tomorrow when her phone shrieked with an alert. "Incoming call, unknown number." She answered, half expecting a telemarketer. Instead, a trembling voice cut through the static. "Anita?" It SMY card. The line went dead. Confusion knotted in Anita's stomach. She showed the phone to Jacob. He frowned, answering his own phone as it rang moments later. "This is Officer Wells," the voice on the other end reported, breathless. "We have an accident on Highway 47. The driver matched your friend's license plate. She's alive, but badly injured. You need to come to Lakeside ER immediately." Panic slammed into Anita's chest. "Jacob, go," she cried, stumbling from the living room. He swept her into his arms with the resolve of a protector. "I'm not leaving you," he whispered, but he dialed the hospital anyway, confirming that Anita would accompany him. The drive felt interminable, every red light an eternity. Rain streaked the windshield, blurring the world into smeared lines of headlights and taillights. Jacob gripped the steering wheel, jaw set, nerves taut as cables. He recalled the cheerful Dani. He knew her infectious energy, her sloppy jokes, and the thought of her lying broken in a hospital bed churned his gut like a tempest. At Lakeside ER, the harsh fluorescent lights illuminated the sterile corridor. Nurses bustled past, their expressions a blend of empathy and urgency. Jacob tried to hide his own trepidation as he guided Anita toward the reception desk. She leaned heavily against him, eyes wide with fear, tears already carving hot paths down her cheeks. The clerk's voice was gentle but firm. "Your friend is in critical condition. I need you to wait here." Jacob exchanged a grim glance with Anita before stepping aside. In moments, a doctor emerged, face drawn, eyes grave. "MS. Morales," he asked softly, and Anita flinched at her last name, a reminder of families and heritage, of roots that suddenly felt fragile. She's stabilized, but her injuries are severe. Concussion, multiple fractures. We won't know the full extent of any internal damage until morning. But she's alive. Anita exhaled, the breath trembling. Jacob placed a protective arm around her as they were led to a waiting area. Dani, meanwhile, drifted into consciousness on a narrow hospital cot. The scent of antiseptic prickled her nostrils. Blinking against the harsh light, she saw tubes jutting from her arms, monitors beeping steadily. Her head throbbed with a relentless pulse. Memories of the crash came rushing back, the spin, the impact, the terror and guilt flared in her chest like a wildfire. She tried to move, but pain lanced through her right leg, and a nurse's gentle hand held her down. "Easy," the nurse murmured. "You've been in an accident. Do you remember your name?" Tears welled in Dani's eyes as she whispered, "Dani Rivera." The nurse's face softened, and she signaled to a nearby doctor who scribbled notes. Through a haze of painkillers and shame, Dani realized the truth. Somewhere out there, Anita was hurt because of her. She had driven drunk, and now someone she loved was suffering. Her breath hitched, and she closed her eyes, wishing she could undo everything in that fatal moment. Jacob refused to leave Anita's side as the night dragged on. He paced the waiting area during every lull, replaying the events in his mind. How had Dani seemed so fine just hours ago? How had they never seen this coming? He hated what he felt, a mixture of anger, sorrow, and a gnawing dread that things would never be the same. Finally, just before dawn, Dani's doctor approached. "Mr. Carter," he asked, looking at Jacob with weary concern. "Would you like an update?" Jacob nodded, heart pounding. The doctor explained that Dani's injuries were serious, but not life-threatening. She'll need surgery for a fractured femur and observation for a possible subdural hematoma. We'll know more after her scans. Jacob's relief was tempered by the weight of responsibility. He needed to notify authorities at how? Dani was his friend, and part of him recoiled at the idea of turning her in. Yet, the law was clear. Driving under the influence and causing injury was a felony. He steeled himself as he left the room, finding the nearest officer on duty. The conversation was clinical, devoid of emotion. "We have a patient matching the description. She'll be released into custody once stable." Jacob agreed, and just like that, Dani's fate was sealed in cold, official language. Across town at the precinct, Detective Marion Jacobson, known simply as Jacob, to those who knew him, read Dani's name on the incident report. Even knowing her struggles, this news shocked him. He'd known Dani since college, been the one who dragged him out of his study sanctuary to mingle at parties, claiming he needed to live a little. He remembered how she cheered him on as he graduated top of his class, how they'd celebrated his first arrest as a badge of honor. Now the roles were reversed. He would arrest her. He steeled himself for the task, rehearsing the words he'd need to say. Compassion warred with duty in his chest like two dogs fighting for dominance. Duty 1. When Dani was finally discharged from the hospital, her body battered, her spirit far more bruised, Jacob sat in the visitor's chair beside her bed, his expression solemn. She turned her head, dark curls plastered to her forehead with sweat, and saw him in his crisp uniform, badge gleaming. Recognition flickered in her bloodshot eyes, followed by panic. "Jake," she rasped, voice trembling. "Jacob, what are you?" He rose, his face a mask of professional calm. "Dani, you violated probation by drinking. You were driving under the influence, crashed into Anita Morales. She's alive, but seriously injured. I'm placing you under arrest." The words fell between them like shards of glass. Dani's body slumped against the pillow, tears spilling from her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she croaked, voice breaking. Jacob's heart clenched, but he held firm. He placed an oxygen mask over her face as she fought to steady her breathing, then handcuffed her wrists with gloves to avoid contact. The cold metal snap of the cuffs echoed through the room, confirming that everything had changed. The ride to the station was silent, punctuated only by the gentle beep of the oxygen monitor and the hum of the patrol car's engine. Dani stared at her bruised reflection in the rearview mirror of the police cruiser, tears staining her cheeks. Shame coiled in her chest like a serpent. She pressed her palms against the cold metal of the cage that separated them, a barrier more chilling than any cell. Jacob watched her through the rearview, eyes stinging with unshed tears. He wanted to say he understood, but how could he? He was obligated to uphold the law. At the precinct, Detective Jacobson processed Dani's arrest with methodical precision. He filled out forms, photographed her injuries, and took her fingerprints. Throughout it all, Dani averted her gaze, consumed by remorse and self-loathing. When they reached the interrogation room, the bright overhead light felt like a spotlight exposing every fault. Jacob entered, hands tucked behind his back. "Dani," he began softly, "I need you to be honest. How many drinks did you have tonight?" Her lip quivered as she met his gaze. "It may be 5. 6. I lost count." He nodded, resisting the urge to soften the blow. "You were speeding. Your BAC was over .15. You nearly killed her." Dani's eyes welled. I know I'm a monster." Jacob's jaw tightened. "You're not a monster. You made a terrible mistake. But now you have to face the consequences." The gravity of his words settled in her chest like lead. She folded her arms around herself, as if trying to hold her soul together. "I wish I could take it back," she whispered. "Every moment of my life will be defined by this." Jacob closed his eyes momentarily, feeling the weight of his duty crush him. "It's going to be a long road," he said finally. "Anita's healing will take months, maybe years. You'll have to answer for that. But first, you'll spend the night in a holding cell until your arraignment." Back at Lakeside ER, Anita was waking from a restless sleep when Jacob appeared by her bedside. She blinked at his uniformed form, confusion knitting her brow. "Jacob? Is she okay?" He gave her a gentle smile, the kind he reserved for before delivering bad news, something to soften the blow. "Dani's stable. She's in custody now. But you," he hesitated, choosing his words. "You have fractures in your leg and arm, a mild concussion. The doctors are optimistic, but you'll need surgery tomorrow and a long recovery." Anita's breath hitched as tears sprang to her eyes. "I'm alive?" He nodded, gently brushing her hair back. "You're going to be all right. It's going to hurt, but we'll see you through it." Relief and guilt warred in her gaze. "It's her fault," she said quietly. "How could she do this to me?" Jacob held her hand, recognizing that no answer would suffice. "People make terrible mistakes. Right now, focus on healing. We'll figure out everything else later." That night, in the cold concrete of the holding cell, Dani lay on a narrow cot, staring up at the flickering fluorescent bulb. The cacophony of distant footsteps, clanking doors, and murmured conversations seeped through the walls. She traced imaginary paths in the ceiling's chipped paint, her mind a whirlwind of regret. She replayed the accident endlessly, the spin, the impact, the flash of a taillight she briefly thought belonged to a deer before she realized it was a woman on an old bicycle. Anita, riding home from a friend's. The memory tormented her, each iteration more vivid than the last. She had been drunk, careless, heedless of the friend who loved her. Now Anita was fighting for her health because of her recklessness. At dawn, Dani was led to her arraignment in handcuffs, the courthouse's imposing columns rising like silent judges. Reporters clustered outside with cameras and microphones, eager for any statement. Dani's eyes darted around, terrified of being recognized. She saw Jacob in the back of the room, his expression unreadable. When the judge entered, everyone rose and the bailiff read the charges: DUI causing serious bodily injury, reckless endangerment, and probation violation. The bail was set at $50,000, an amount Dani could never hope to pay. Jacob watched from the gallery as Dani trembled at the defense attorney's table, barely able to meet the judge's gaze. The prosecutor laid bare the facts: blood alcohol level, speed above the limit, the victim's injuries. The courtroom was silent, every spectator acutely aware that a life had been appended. After the hearing, Dani was led back to jail, each step echoing down the marbled halls. She passed Anita's father, her voice choked when she tried to speak to him. His face was etched with grief and fury. He turned away, a silent accusation that cut deeper than any words. Dani felt it as the physical weight of a blow. In the days that followed, the small town erupted in gossip. Anita's hospital room filled with flowers and get-well cards, her hospital bracelet a stark reminder of how fragile life could be. Family and friends took turns sitting with her, offering prayers and blankets. She drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by nightmares of a speeding car and a mangled frame. When she finally awakened fully, her first coherent thought was of Dani. A torrent of emotions engulfed her: anger at the betrayal, sorrow for her own shattered body, and a longing for justice she could scarcely articulate. Jacob visited Anita daily, updating her on the case and bringing small comforts of favorite novel, a cup of herbal tea. He found his own heart battered by guilt. Should he have insisted Dani seek help before she touched a steering wheel? Could he have seen the signs earlier? Each visit left him hollow, as if tiny pieces of his integrity chipped away. Meanwhile, Dani sat in her cell, her reflection in the small windowless mirror a stranger, hollow-eyed, gaunt, haunted by self-loathing. She begged for forgiveness in letters she wrote, but never sent, letters to Anita, to her parents, to Jacob. Her only visitors were her public defender and her mother, whose tears and trembling kisses made Dani's guilt blossom into something monstrous. She vowed to turn her life around. If she ever emerged from this hell, she would dedicate herself to making amends. But the road ahead stretched out, dark and uncertain. On the day Anita was discharged from the hospital, she walked out on crutches, her legs still encased in a brace, arms splinted. She blinked at the bright sunlight, a world forever changed. Jacob was waiting for her by the car, bulletin boards of unread texts already accumulating on his phone. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Anita took a shaky breath. Like half of me is gone, she admitted. She lifted her left hand to show the splints on her fingers where she'd fought the handlebars. Jacob winced, gripping her hand. I'm so sorry, Anita. She held up a hand to stop him. I know it wasn't your fault. His jaw tensed as he pressed her hand to his chest. We'll get through this. I promise. Dani's pretrial motions began, court dates scheduled months in advance. Each date was a reminder that she was trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The prosecutor pressed for a harsh sentence to set an example, while the defense pleaded for leniency, citing her clean record until now and genuine remorse. Jacob attended every hearing, torn between his duty to remain impartial and his lingering affection for Dani. He watched as Dani's once bright spirit dimmed under the merciless glare of the justice system. Anita, now safe at home with her parents, grappled with the fallout. Physical therapy sessions stretched through long afternoons, her laughter and energy consumed by painstaking exercises to regain strength. Images of the crash haunted her. She couldn't ride her bike past that stretch of highway without seeing Dani's twisted sedan in her mind. She wrestled with anger that boiled like magma within her, anger at Dani, at herself for riding out so late, even at fate for bringing them to this juncture. Friends insisted on supporting her, but she often retreated into silence, tugging the blankets over her head to keep the world at bay. As sentencing day approached, the courthouse once again buzzed with anticipation. Dani wore a gray jail jumpsuit, her hair tied back, eyes downcast. Anita, supported by her parents and Jacob, entered the courtroom with a brace under her skirt. She walked with difficulty but purpose, clutching a folder that held victim impact statements from her family and herself. When it was her turn to read, her voice trembled but grew stronger with each word, how the accident had stolen her independence, how she grieved the loss of simple freedoms, how she now faced a future marred by scars. Dani listened from her seat, tears streaming down her cheeks, as the weight of every crushed moment settled in her chest. The judge listened intently, then addressed Dani directly. You have shown remorse, and I believe you can be rehabilitated. However, you must also be held accountable. I am sentencing you to 2 years in a rehab-focused correctional facility, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will also perform 200 hours of community service at a victim support organization and make restitution payments to MS. Morales' family. There was a hush as his gavel came down. Dani's shoulders folded forward, the sentence pressing on her like a physical weight. As Dani was led away, she looked up at Anita one last time. In that brief moment, their eyes locked. Anita's filled with sorrow and tentative compassion, Dani's brimming with regret and desperation for absolution. The silent exchange held years of stolen memories and uncertain hope for forgiveness that might never come fully. Jacob led Anita outside afterward, the cool air prickling her skin. She wrapped the folder of statements to her chest like a shield. What now? She asked him, voice soft. He took her hand, careful of her splint. Now we heal. One day at a time. And so the aftermath began. Dani entered the rehab facility, a place where every corridor echoed with stories of broken lives seeking redemption. She attended therapy sessions, shared her story with others whose mistakes had brought them to the same place. She listened to professionals dissect the chemistry of addiction, the fragile barrier between enjoyment and self-destruction. Each morning she woke with a hangover of regret. Each night she drifted to sleep haunted by Anita's pained face. Slowly, she began to confront the roots of her dependency, the anxiety that drove her to seek oblivion in a bottle, the loneliness she masked with late-night conversations and reckless choices. Miles away, Anita attended her physical therapy sessions with a stoic determination. With each bend and stretch, tears blurred her vision as she recalled the sudden crash and the betrayal by a friend. Some days she screamed in frustration, every muscle ache a reminder of how easily life could change. But she persisted, fueled by a fierce will to reclaim her body and her sense of self. Jacob stayed by her side, driving her to appointments, bringing warm soup on cold afternoons, listening when she needed to vent her anger. He walked the line between protector and partner, supporting her healing while struggling with his own guilt for arresting the one he loved. Over months, small victories emerged. Dani's once shaky hands grew steady as she learned to resist cravings. She wrote letters to Anita, some she kept private, others she shared when she was sure they wouldn't incite more pain. In them, she apologized repeatedly, not seeking forgiveness, but acknowledging the weight of her actions. She worked late nights sorting donations at the local addiction center, scrubbing toilets at a safe house for battered women, each act of service a tiny step toward redemption. Anita, too, experienced breakthroughs. She weaned off pain medications carefully, refusing to trade one dependency for another. Her therapist helped her channel anger into advocacy. She began volunteering for a foundation that supported victims of DUI accidents, speaking at schools about the real-life consequences of drunk driving. Each time she told her story, her voice trembled, but a steely resolve shone through. She would ensure others didn't make the same mistake. Jacob watched both women transform. In court, Anita's family had vouched for her strength, while Dani's mother cried openly as she testified about her daughter's newfound commitment to change. The judge commended Dani's progress, but reminded her that restitution and probation were still pending. The legal system had released her from confinement, but the moral and emotional sentences would linger far longer. One crisp spring morning, Dani was released on parole. As she stepped out of the rehabilitation complex, blinking into the sun's warmth, she felt unmoored like a tree uprooted and replanted in unfamiliar soil. She clutched a small bundle of belongings and a schedule of outpatient programs. She had no home to return to, her apartment had been leased out, and her friends had drifted away. The world she once took for granted now felt alien. But she was determined to reclaim a place in it, starting by seeing Anita. Dani learned that Anita was attending a community event at the local park, a fundraiser for the Accident Victims Foundation. Anxiety roiled in her chest as she approached the tent where Anita stood, greeting children with therapy dogs and offering pamphlets to passing families. Her leg brace peeked from beneath her skirt, a reminder of the scars she bore. When Dani's voice quavered, "Anita," she flinched. Anita turned, eyes widening as recognition and shock flickered across her face. The crowd hushed, as if sensing a moment suspended between possible forgiveness and permanent rupture. Dani's words tumbled out, "I'm so sorry. I've been working on myself. I know there's nothing I can say to fix what I did. But I need you to know I'm trying to become someone worthy of your forgiveness." Her gaze wavered, and her shoulders shook with the weight of her remorse. Jacob arrived then, standing protectively behind Anita, his expression cautious. Anita stared at Dani, her chest heaving. For a heartbeat, time stretched. Then she stepped forward and placed a hand on Dani's arm, tentative contact that spoke of both pain and the slightest glimmer of compassion. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly, her voice fragile but resolute. "But I need more time." Dani nodded, tears brimming. "I understand." As Dani walked away that day, she felt the first stirrings of hope in months, a fragile bud in the frozen soil of her guilt. Anita watched her go, uncertainty mingling with a cautious desire to believe that Dani's transformation was genuine. Jacob stood between them, carrying his own burden of having enforced justice, yet longing for his friends to find solace. In the months to come, Dani continued her outreach, working at the foundation where Anita volunteered. She tutored children of families devastated by addiction, shared her story with teenagers to deter them from drunk driving, and slowly rebuilt trust in the community. Every day was a struggle. Whispers followed her down the street. acquaintances averted their eyes. But she channeled the shame into determination fuel for the hard work of redemption. Anita, for her part, navigated forgiveness on her own terms. She attended support groups for accident survivors, spoke to legislators about stricter DUI laws, and learned to ride a stationary bike in her living room. She still flinched at sudden noises and struggled with phantom pains in her leg. But she also discovered a resilience she never knew she had. Underneath the brace, her muscles grew stronger, symbolizing the healing she achieved inside. Jacob watched their parallel journeys with quiet pride and relief. Though he'd been the one to arrest Dani, he never lost faith in her capacity for change. And though he'd stood by Anita through her darkest days, he never doubted her strength. When he proposed to Anita kneeling on bended knee in the park where she'd first been released from the hospital, her answer was a whispered yes, tears and genuine joy mingling in her eyes. He saw in her embrace the promise of renewal, not just for them, but for the family they would build together. Over time, the memory of that terrible night settled into a new shape, not a constant howl of guilt and pain, but a reminder of the fragility of life and the power of accountability. Dani never forgot the weight of her actions. She carried it like a scar, visible only in the way she leaned in to help each victim she encountered. Anita never forgot the terror of the crash. It became a catalyst for her advocacy and compassion. And Jacob, who had once felt torn between friendship and duty, found solace in having upheld the law while supporting both women in their healing. The small town, too, changed. Residents who once turned a blind eye to weekend escapades now paused to consider the cost of a single reckless choice. Schools invited former officers and survivors to speak, and local bars implemented stricter policies about serving intoxicated patrons. The story of Dani's crash became a cautionary tale, whispered over dinner tables and recounted on local news segments not merely as a scandal, but as a lesson in redemption and resilience. In the final moments of this expanded tale, Dani stands by the edge of the same riverbank where Anita once partied, the water flowing steadily beneath the sun's golden warmth. Instead of a bottle in hand, she holds a bouquet of wildflowers and offering to Anita during today's fundraising event. She breathes in the scent of fresh grass, the laughter of children echoing across the meadow, and for the first time in years, she feels at peace. She knows the gates of her past can never close completely. The consequences of her choices remain etched into the fabric of her life. Yet beyond those gates lies a horizon defined not by brokenness, but by the possibilities of rebuilding, forgiveness, and grace. And with that knowledge, she steps forward, ready to embrace whatever comes next.